Welcome back to the channel. It's time to talk about the very best comic books you can buy this week. And it's an indie heavy week, but there's one comic book that stands out from the rest. It's DC Comics Batman. And here to talk to me about that is Jim from Weird Science. How you doing, Jim?
Awesome, Wes. Thanks for having me on a big, Comic-Con weekend.
Absolutely. Everyone's having a good time at New York Comic-Con. And we're having a good time talking about Batman 128, Chip Zdarsky, Jorge Jimenez. This is, in my opinion, and Chip Zdarsky's Batman run has been good so far. This is easily the standout issue. There's so many moments in here that are absolutely fantastic. Jorge Jimenez's art really just stands out. There's a couple of moments that are just really breathtaking, and they make Failsafe feel like one of the biggest threats Batman and the Justice League have ever faced in their lives. I couldn't believe just how hard-hitting this particular issue is.
Chip Zdarsky, when he first announced coming on the Batman book, he said that he was going to have Batman's Doomsday. And I actually rolled my eyes. Why are you doing that? But instead, I think it might be bigger because of the idea of Failsafe just ripping through Superman and everything else in the Justice League. It feels bigger. It feels classic is what it feels like, even with it kind of playing off a lot of things we've seen before. But Chip Zdarsky's able to put those all together in this goulash that really elevates it and makes it fun, makes it exciting, and makes it feel like an actual threat to Batman and the Justice League, which we haven't seen much recently.
And the art by Jorge Jimenez is so amazing. There's a moment where Batman and Superman are both essentially incapacitated. They're lying next to each other. And it felt like such a good character moment as they're kind of looking at each other going, oh my goodness, what's going on? Are we going to survive? Like, I couldn't believe how hard that hit for my Jorge Jimenez.
I'm with you. And you mentioned it before. You've mentioned it a couple of times. Jorge Jimenez is allowed, Chip Zdarsky's giving him equal time as storyteller. And that right there, you said that moment is just a visual moment where when you see that, it does get you in the feels and you feel the threat. You feel the pain of what's going on. I mean, seeing Superman laying there like he was, you actually felt the pain that you could even go back to the death of Superman and say, oh my God, look at him. He is just destroyed.
Yeah, and obviously they're playing off the Tower of Babel because Batman has programmed Failsafe to be able to defeat the entire Justice League. And there's some really ingenious ways that he's doing it. Obviously, with Superman, it involves kryptonite. But like what he does to Black Canary was really cool when it happens. I couldn't believe it. And it really feels like Chip Zdarsky put a lot of thought into what Failsafe was capable of and what Batman would program into a robot to defeat the Justice League.
The thing about it is Batman wouldn't kill necessarily. He wants to incapacitate Black Canary. He wouldn't go out to get. And so what happens is you see Chip Zdarsky thinking it through because at points you think, oh my God, like that's going to cause more trouble than this, whatever. But then you go the next step and realize, oh my God, like Chip Zdarsky is thinking like Batman. He's actually thinking it through. And it really, really works. As Batman, and as we're getting that narration, it plays out really, really good.
The only problem I have with this comic book is the end of it, Jim.
Yeah.
And it's not because it's not well done. This absolutely sets up the occupation of Gotham better than City of Bane, better than Fear State, better than Joker War, any of those. The only problem is we've seen Gotham taken over by 3 different villains over the past 2 or 3 years. The story itself is kind of played out. I don't like him leading into something that we've literally just read, but he does set it up so much better.
You even said Tower of Babel. You get stuff, the Grant Morrison, Zorn-R. You get all these things going in here, but he is able to make it this cohesive whole that actually is bigger than the sum of its parts. But at the end, you just wonder how many times is Gotham going to be taken over and how many, like Mayor Nakano, that guy needs to get out of here. That guy on his watch is terrible, but it's better, but it's still been there, done that. That's the only thing that brings it down was the end.
Yeah, otherwise it's like a 5-star comic book. It's perfect, really. Batman 128 kind of goes right to the top of like best comic book issue of the year for me. You're definitely going to be hearing that at the end of the year when I talk about that stuff. Now let's go over the indie comic book scene and talk about some of the things that stood out there. They don't all quite live up to Batman, but IDW's TMNT Saturday Morning Adventures #1 from Eric Burham and Tim Lottie. It just feels like I'm a kid again watching the 1987 cartoon, like with my brothers and friends from around the block. And we're seeing like the old school dynamic of the TMNT heroes, not from the original Mirage comics, obviously, but the cartoon and the Archie comics themselves. And it's such a wonderful, beautiful, bright, vibrant comic book to see. And it just feels so different because everything is so ugly and dirty and dark nowadays.
If you don't smile when you open up I don't know what's going on, because when you see it, it really looks like the cartoon come to life, and the story itself is just fun. It's there for fun. It's there for people to just jump in and have a great time with the Turtles, like you said, to bring back that feeling that you had when you were watching the cartoon, especially nowadays, like most of the Turtles stuff, and even it's a little darker. So this is nice to have. And just, I can't say how much it just looks great. It looks fantastic. And it's basically a love letter to everybody who loved the cartoon. And instead of, like you said, people try to put their stamp on, but their stamp ends up not really jiving with the feels of it. And this fits perfectly. It fits 100%.
Nice to see some creators go out there and really celebrate a property rather than try to tear it down and make something better in their own image. Speaking of image, let's go over to Rogue Sun number 7. Ryan Parrott, Z. Carlos is in as the new artist on this one. This is the beginning of a new story arc. We kind of wrapped up the issues with Dylan and his mom and dad in the past. He's now running solo here, and they do something really cool here. Besides the art by Z. Carlos fitting perfectly in here, replacing Abel, they introduced this new antagonist, and he's kind of a time-traveling character. And the way Ryan Parrott explains this and the paradox that the main protagonist is going through, he uses this really cool thing that we used to read when we were kids. They're called Choose Your Own Adventures. And you're bouncing around, and he's kind of explaining, using this technique, how this time traveling stuff works and how Dylan is essentially cursed to always end up at the same place in the end. I thought it was really brilliant.
I have not read the series. You have explained it to me, and I'm going to read it then, because I love the Choose Your Own Adventure stuff. And the funny play is, I think that he's playing the idea. When I used to do the Choose Your Own Adventures, I would cheat. I mean, everybody would. You look ahead and whatever. But the play of a time travel that ends up where you really end up at the same spot anyway. Like, there's no cheating it. There's no doing it. Whatever you do and pick ends up. That's pretty clever.
I've liked Rogue Sun essentially from the very beginning, but I'm really excited for this new story arc. I was wondering how long they were going to get bogged down in the mother-father thing going on with Dylan. I'm glad they moved past it pretty early on. Really excited for that. This is your first big recommendation, Walking Dead Deluxe Edition, number 48, Image Comics. Robert Kirkman, Charlie Adler. If you're a big fan of the comic book, or if you're a big fan of the TV show, you will immediately recognize where you are. We're in the prison. We've got the governor going on and all that stuff, and it's beautifully colored now.
I didn't read the original Walking Dead when it came out, and I haven't watched the TV show. I watched one episode, the first episode, and I am actually going through, and this comes out twice a month, and it is colored by Dave McKeag, and the coloring, it started out a little shaky. It's gotten really good, and it ends up being one of those things that's a great thing for people who hadn't read it before, but it's also a cool thing to go back and read if you had watched the TV show or read. And really, this issue is one of the most important issues. It's one of the biggest issues of the entire series. So I just figured I wanted to throw it out there just to remind people that it is coming out, and it's doing rather well. And in the back of this, each issue has a cutting floor deal where you get the original script, or at least outline, and then you have Robert Kirkman discussing things, and he's pretty honest with himself about what he did maybe change things, and even how the TV show ended up changing it as well. So it's a pretty cool, like a deluxe package, overall new covers, stuff like that.
Definitely want to go check that one out. We're going to stick with Image Comics and go with another really superstar creator here, Jeff Johns, Gary Frank, Junkyard Joe number 1. The character first teased or introduced in that Geiger 100-page special. And they're kind of introducing the character of Junkyard Joe and explaining how he gets to the future.
You don't have to know anything about Geiger. And I actually made a mistake on our aficionados deal this weekend, saying that it was a one-shot, because I actually treated it like that. I have not read all of Geiger. And so when I went into it, it does continue, but you can just go in and read this. And it is actually Vietnam, which is pretty cool, the way that it plays out. And you end up having a story of a platoon in Vietnam that finds out that their new guy is a robot. And that sounds so crazy, but it's such a grounded story and really plays out well with some feels, alt history, because it does involve in the Geiger universe, but even stuff that gets bigger than that, and then ends with kind of a mystery of what's going on with Junkyard Joe that will continue on. But if you just wanted to read a one-shot to see a story that, again, a war story that has a lot of feels. You end up having a robot almost find its heart. And just as an aside, most of the money that it makes is going to go to the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans and Veterans Aid. So that's kind of a cool thing on top of all of it. And it's really well done. Gary Frank's art's incredible. And I just suggest reading it, even if you hadn't known anything about Geiger up until this point.
Well, if you haven't read Geiger, you need to get on that, because that was a really good series as well. And this isn't a one-shot. It is, I believe, a miniseries. I think it's 5 issues. This is our final recommendation from the indie comic front. I believe this is Matt Kent's imprint at Dark Horse. Minor Threats #2. Patton Oswalt, Jordan Blum, Scott Hepburn. So we have a couple people more associated with Hollywood and a little bit of geek culture rather than comic books.
It's a parody of a lot of different superhero books. You have a big play with Batman. There is a Robin character that gets killed, and you end up having these D-list villains that get together that want to take down, say, the Joker in this universe, but doing it because that balance between the superheroes and the villains is off with this idea of killing a Robin type character, but also they want to get a reward. And what I really like about this is it reminds me, I don't know if you had read the Donny Cates Paybacks book back in the day, which was a really good book. And it gives that feel where these characters are actually more fleshed out than I actually expected in a parody kind of funny type book. But it is starting to get a bigger universe, and I'm really enjoying it. I actually was very surprised by it. Patton Oswalt and Jordan Blum had done a MODOK book together, I believe, at Marvel, which was okay. But this actually is really well done. It's almost like a jokey, Black Hammer type feel to it. And I think that it's something that a lot of people might get a kick out of.
Those are our indie comic book recommendations for the week. We don't have anything else DC related. Batman was the big one. Not a great week for DC or Marvel for that matter. But we're both recommending Ant-Man #4 from Marvel Comics, Al Ewing, Tom Riley. And this is when we finally learn all about this 4th Ant-Man that's been introduced, kind of been jumping around here and there within the story. There's a ton of exposition explaining where this character came from and how Ultron and all that stuff fits in there. But I think this is a really loving tribute and one of the few modern Marvel comic books that I think you could even introduce and enjoy with your children.
People get upset about different, the legacy of a character and the mantles and things like that, but it ends up bringing them all together. And what I love about it, and you said you can give this to a kid. What I love about stuff like that is when a kid could also learn some things, can actually learn about some other characters that you can jump off to read other series. And it really is a good springboard to give anybody an idea of the different Ant-Men, because most people probably only know the Scott Lang from the movies. I mean, comic book people will know a little more than that, especially Hank and stuff like that. But even so, it does feel like a love letter, really well done. It surprised the heck out of me when I first read that first issue. That got me hooked, and I'm glad that I read through it, but I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. So I hope that people, in retrospect, go and read it. And they even have a Wasp one coming up, too. It's really well done. The art's great. I mean, it really fits the story. Everything is really good about this. It's a really good book.
Just by the sales data that we do have, that unfortunately it just didn't really find an audience, despite being a really good representation of Ant-Man.
Yeah, it didn't seem to catch a hold of it. It is a shame, but maybe after the fact, once it hits Unlimited, maybe more people will, check it out, because it's really worth checking out, especially if you just wait till it comes out to Marvel Unlimited. If you have that, check it out the minute that it hits, because I think that there's no reason not to like it. It's just so well done and such a nice way to do something with Ant-Man.
Chip Zdarsky's Batman series was our featured comic book this week. If Jim and I weren't able to sell you just on that issue alone, and I think that probably should have done it because it was amazing, I actually did a full review of the first issue of Chip Zdarsky and Jorge Jimenez on Batman Together. I believe it's Batman 125. Definitely check this out if you need more information, more reasons to go read this series. It's absolutely phenomenal. One of the few things DC's doing that's amazing. If you can't see it here, there's also a link in the video description.